From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.
Racism is steeped into the very core of this country. And now, in 2020, Black voices are tired of being ignored, muffled, and killed. Millions of Americans are demonstrating, protesting to make their voices heard, especially Black Americans. A movement has to arise from the ashes of the moment. From Moment to Movement is a series of one-on-one truth-telling conversations with the Black community, aimed at working towards addressing police brutality and changing systemic racism.
Our guest today is Hashim Coates. I'll call you a political operative in Denver there. Hashim, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me here, Tamara.
Now, Hashim, I know you work on a lot of big campaigns there in the state of Colorado. I think a lot of folks historically in the Black community, and maybe even especially now, feel like voting really doesn't matter. It doesn't change things. Getting politically engaged is not the route to go. What would you say, given your experience, to that sort of mentality?
I would definitely say that they are wrong. I can understand the feeling that is. I can understand where they feel that way, but I definitely would say they're wrong. The facts are out there that show that voting is one of the mechanisms to change, and it is one of the mechanisms that those who are standing against Black progress fear the most. And you can look at that based upon the legislation that has had to occur behind Black people having the right to vote, the suppression once we got the right to vote, and the amount of money that has been thrown in against restricting and making the vote small.
Right. And we talk about voter suppression. A lot of folks don't realize it's happening today.
Yes.
I live in Atlanta, and of course, Stacey Abrams' work around voter suppression, getting out the vote. Can you give some evidence that voting does really matter and getting politically engaged does count?
So the anecdotal evidence, I'm so sorry, I don't have like that type of information on hand, but you can look at the fight about being used Stacey Abrams' race, the fight that was going on to certify the votes and how things escalate quickly into the courts when there has to be rulings on what counts and what doesn't count. You can look at the closing of polling locations. When you go from 600 polling locations open down to the double digits, the low double digits, the teens or the 20s, for me, that's evidence of something is going on. Why don't they want these people to vote? If we talk about civil liberties and patriotism, voting is one of those things, but why restrict people on voting if that is a way of them showing their patriotism, right? So I kind of like solve for X. Voting has to be important because these forces that have been historically against me don't want me to utilize my right to vote.
Right. And I think that's just another, in my opinion, another form of oppression to not exercise your right to vote. So I just wanted to give people a bit of background of what you do and how you're committed to that effort. And moving forward in the conversation, I think about, many Black men in particular and having their skin weaponized against them. When you see and hear the news stories about George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and there in Denver, Elijah McClain, what actually goes through your head? What are you thinking at this moment in time?
I'm thinking things don't change. And I'm thinking that things change at the same time. As a child, I would watch Eyes on the Prize because I would come on every February during Black History Month. It would come on and I'd watch it. I'm like, wow, I wish I could have grown up where I was a part of something like that. Then I blink, and here I am, a full-grown adult, and things are just like that. I mean, except for we have the right to vote, and the tactics have changed. But when I think about these people who unknowingly sacrifice their lives for us to have progress, I thank them for that debt. At the same time, I have sympathy and empathy for their families. But I get encouraged, and then at the same time I get depressed because I feel that even since those incidents have happened, not I feel like even since those incidents have happened, we still have had Black deaths, Black murders at the hands of these systemic institutions. But one thing I like about George Floyd, and it's his past. It is his checkered past. So even though his skin was actually a part of the factor that caused him to be murdered by police officers, but it's the past of the fact that he was not this lily white persona. And with his unwilling sacrifice, he began to set the wheel in motion of changing the world and making people pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Say more about why that's important. The fact that he wasn't white to move this needle forward and take us out of this moment and into more of a movement.
Gotcha. So it's more so not like for his race being his. Well, it's important that because he's not white, because the issue probably would have been swept under the rug. But when I say the whiteness, like the lily white, the clean sheet of his past, that he had some other arrests and some convictions on his record. When we look at the story of Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks was not the first Black person to refuse to give up her seat or their seat on the bus. There was an issue before, and my God, my parents would be so ashamed. The name slips me. Of the woman that happened before, right? She was a darker skinned Black woman. She had a couple of children out of wedlock. And I want to say that she might have had a misdemeanor on her record, but the NAACP and the Black leadership at that time, and the leadership at that time chose not to use her as the example to go forward, but they chose Rosa Parks, who was this woman, this pristine background, formally educated, good job, and skin complexion also played a factor in that. So George was not that. And that's kind of like, I can appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that. That's a very good point, because most of the time, and I think you mentioned this before, that, he had, I know as a reporter, sometimes my editorial and producers, staff was saying, well, they had a criminal record. So what? What does that have to do with it? And so there's been pushback that has failed, I think, largely by the argument on the other side that says, well, he was he had a alleged fake $20 bill, counterfeit bill, and then he had these other records and maybe had drugs in his system, and all of that to that day had been okay to say, well, then he probably kind of deserved it. But what I hear you saying is, no, he didn't deserve it, and he wasn't perfect, and so that's what makes it wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I really wish that the media and society would focus more on that. Let's say, because the counterfeit money is something that is completely alleged because it hasn't been proven.
Right.
But even if it was $20, even back during the time of legal chattel slavery, a Black man's life was worth more than $20.
Right.
Right. So to ever use that as justification really makes me question the logic and the ethics of the person that wants to use that. But if we rewind time and I was thinking about these shootings, the Black man that was shot in his own home in Dallas, right? Like in his own home, they tried to say, well, he had marijuana in there. Well, that's fine, but it wasn't even a warrant or a drug raid that was going on, still wouldn't have justified it. But they grasp at every little thing to use to make it okay, because we aren't these people of society with these lily white backgrounds that are completely submissive and subservient to white supremacy.
Right. And, there's always been this, like you said, well, they probably had something going on. He had marijuana in his house. All that said, what does a young man who is going to the convenience store, having his background, that you're going to respond with aggression when somebody says he looks suspicious for wearing a mask, which we're all supposed to be doing right now during a pandemic. And then even let's just go beyond that. Now you're taking selfies at the crime scene, because I can see a defense attorney up to that point saying, well, they didn't know what they were coming up on. They didn't know if a person was using the mask to keep themselves healthy and safe or to commit a crime, whatever kind of craziness. But when you take it to the point when you have, after the scene is over, now you're taking selfies at the crime scene and then circulating them, I guarantee that wasn't the first time.
No, it wasn't the first time, right? And sadly, it won't be the last time. And I'm not law school trained, but for me, that would help support malicious intent. And it would highlight the culture of the Aurora Police Department, which ties into the culture of every single police department here in America. So when they say that 140-pound 23-year-old was too much for 3 trained police officers who weighed considerably more than him individually, but collectively, they could not control him. And then they thought it was okay for the EMT to show up and inject him with an over the limit type of sedative. Sounds like murder to me.
Right. So here's the thing, and you've expressed this, and so have I. This isn't the first time that we've seen cases like this, but it's the first time where we've seen so many people of not color, so many white folks join us on the front lines, whether it be rallies, demonstrations, what have you, writing their congressperson, being on a state or national level. Is there something different happening here that we have maybe never seen or haven't seen since the 60s?
I think that this moment was equivalent to the Edmund Pettus Bridge moment when it happened to get caught on TV. So technology, I think, has a part to play. But I also think that, as I affectionately referred to, the orange piece of phlegm in the White House, that his behavior and the behavior of his cronies and flunkies has kind of helped set the tone in America, where it's like, okay, I guess Black people were right about something. And yeah, this is pretty bad. So all of that has been a contributing factor to this movement, because if you've been paying attention, these uprisings should have happened. Cities should have burned long time ago, before you and I were even born, because since 1619, we'll use that as a date for reference, Black lives have only been valued as property, but have always been targeted and viewed as expendable. So it's a long time overdue, and I guess people are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like so where you been all this time, right?
So, right. And I think one other thing, I think we have these agent provocateurs that were involved. And I think kind of the things have have backfired, I should say, on them. Because I think it gathered attention. And you have more people, Black, white, brown, yellow, whatever, are paying attention and reading and studying history. So when these type of moments happen, and civil unrest occurs, and you look at how revolutions are begun, I think things spun out of control from what they wanted. And I'm kind of happy for it. So.
Mm-hmm. So now, what would you say to the white allies now who don't really know what to do or what to say, but they do want to get engaged?
I would say reach out. Okay, first I would say view Black lives the same way that you view white lives, right? If you would be offended if something happened to your white child, grandchild, niece, nephew, or self, be offended when you see that type of action happening to a Black person. Reminds me of The Time to Kill when Matthew McConaughey had the jury close their eyes and gave the descriptive details of what happened to the little black girl and told them, now imagine if she was white. I need white allies to do that. I also need them to understand that just using a hashtag is not enough. Just putting a sign up in your front yard, especially close to your front porch, so those passing by may or may not see it, is not enough. What they can do is that they can reach out to Black community groups, some of the old traditional groups like the Urban League, NAACP or NAACP, or they can reach out to some of the newer groups, right? Those that work underneath the name Black Lives Matter, or they're those in politics or those that trust, and I'm not all Black is good Black, right? There's some Black that's spelled with a capital B and some Black that's spelled with a small b. But ask the friends, but also don't have an expectation that labor should be free coming from these Black sources. And they can also study. I mean, there's books out there. Buy the books by the Black authors that talk about racism and talk about anti-racism and talking about what to do in the movement, because that's another way of fighting white supremacy as well, is not going to sources like Tim Wise, right? And Tim Wise will tell you in person, and anything that he does, all he's doing is standing up here telling you things that Black women and Black people have been telling you for years. But yet he's rich off of that. But yet we won't give that type of money to the Ta-Nehisi Coateses, to the Ava DuVernays, to the Bell Hooks. Like, we won't give them that money, but we will give that type of money to people like Tim Wise.
Mm-hmm. So there is some ownership on our end in terms of buying products and reading books and going to films that are produced and developed by Black folks and putting our money where our mouth is. There's value in that.
Yes, the FUBU mentality, right? For us,
that's
by
right.
us.
That's
yes.
right. Right. Hashim Coates, community activist, smart dude, and I really appreciate your time and insight. This program here on PBS is to elevate Black voices, and you've given us something to think about, and we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You bet. And thank you all for watching. If you want to learn more about this episode or other episodes from Moment to Movement, you can go to pbs.org. I am Tamara Banks. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.